Welcome to our mini lecture on Middle and South America, an absolutely phenomenal part of the world in which we will begin to see some more of our key world regional geography themes. On this slide in particular, isthmus, or a land bridge, we can see connecting Central America or even North America to South America. And in this course and textbook, it's important to note that although Mexico is geologically a part of North America, we're including it here in the Middle and South America section. We can remember from last week the North American Free Trade Agreement, including Mexico. However, it's commonly included in Middle America as well. And in this case, we'll be looking at both Middle and South America together. The region has been heavily impacted by European colonialism. There are wider disparities of wealth than any other region on Earth. And recently it's been making a shift away from raw materials-based industries, more to manufacturing and service-based industries. These terms we'll take a continual look at throughout the semester. Here we see a stunning photo from northern Chile, and indicative of the mountainous regions of the Andes, all the way up, continuing in Mexico and through North America, the Pacific Rim of Fire mountains. Other key terms would be indigenous. Peoples or groups in this case refers to that which is native to a particular place or region. And we took a look at Middle and South America in the first slide there. To understand a bit about the physical geography and environmental issues, I mentioned the Pacific Rim of Fire. Perhaps some of you have heard of this term, including nations as far away as Japan and the Southwest Pacific Islands, volcanoes of Polynesia. This refers to the plate tectonics that underlie the oceans and continents that have a consistent geologic tectonic activity all the way around the Pacific Ocean, leading to earthquakes, volcanoes, large mountain ranges. So as it says here, nearly continuous chain of mountains that stretches along the western edge from Alaska to the Tierra del Fuego, which is the southern tip of South America. In Mexico, these mountains are known as the Sierra Madre, and in South America as the Andes. And what the book doesn't include here is that this also includes the mountains of Russia and Japan southward from there as well. Here we see it's formed by a lengthy subduction zone, so where one tectonic plate is subducting or going underneath another one. In this case, where the Cocos and the Nazca plate plunge beneath the three continental plates of North America, Caribbean, and South America. Here we see a stunning picture from Tierra del Fuego and cormorants and the Andes Mountains in the background, sea lions. I've been to these islands off of Ushuaia, the city of Ushuaia, and it's a beautiful, beautiful area. If you ever get a chance to go, you should. And so we also have the highlands regions, the chain of high and low islands in the Eastern Caribbean, also volcanic in origin, created as the Atlantic plate thrust underneath the eastern edge of the Caribbean. So not a lot of people associate the Caribbean with volcanoes. So that's why it's important to point this out here and to take note of this. And it's not unusual for these volcanoes to erupt. And then of course, the lowlands as well. Vast lowlands extend over the much of the land of this region, east of west of the mountains. In Mexico, this is the coastal plain of the borders of the Gulf of Mexico. We have Central America, wide aprons of sloping land descent to the Caribbean coast. The largest feature of South American lowlands is the Amazon basin, which we see here in the photo. And also, it's important to keep in mind that the Earth's largest remaining expanse of tropical rainforest gives the Amazon basin a very strong global significance, as it's an immense reservoir or zone of biodiversity. this case, we might think of reservoir as the reservoirs of the Sierra Nevada foothills in California, storing vast amounts of water, but the term is also used to refer to large gatherings of other phenomena as well, in this case biodiversity, or the sum total of genetic diversity in biological organisms, certainly of which the Amazon has a great reserve. The Amazon has 20% of the Earth's flowing surface waters. It's the largest percent in any one area, running in rivers so deep that ocean liners can stream more than 2,000 miles upriver from the Atlantic Ocean to Iquitos in Peru. It's a phenomenal distance, the farthest inland distance of any river in the world that an ocean liner can travel. When rivers flood, silt and organic material are transported by floodwaters to renew soil of surrounding areas. Sometimes floods are seen as a bad thing, but throughout history, evolution for the succession of aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems, flooding is absolutely crucial for the replenishment of land. Many of our, in fact, almost all of our prominent agricultural areas have become very fertile, rich because of flooding. So you can think of the California Great Central Valley, very rich soils because of all the flooding from the rivers from the Sierra Nevada. Likewise with many of the river valleys in South America and Middle America as well. So to take a bit closer look at the tropical forests and climate change and globalization, those latter big two themes that we'll look at consistently in the course. See these neat maps in our textbook looking at human impact, including land cover, roads, grading scale of the human impact on the land, overfishing in the seas. So South America had a rapid deforestation since the 1970s, which has had global repercussions. Climate change now dominates the concerns about deforestation in the Amazon and the rest of the region. Rainforests are being diminished by multiple human impacts, including the clearing of land to raise cattle, grow crops for animal feed, ethanol, which is a biofuel made from soybeans most of the time, and for cooking oil as well. But the cultivation of soy and soybeans for export around the world, especially from Brazil and Argentina, these are very significant drivers of deforestation in the region. We can also see that now many countries are trying to earn money from the beauty of the natural environments through ecotourism, and that ecotourism sometimes can have downsides if mismanaged. Over visiting, you might have heard about how Yosemite National Park in California is unable to keep up with maintenance from so many visitors. Well, there's a large amount of impacts that can happen from tourism, and we're seeing this in Central and South America as well. And it's also important to note the water crisis. Although Middle and South America receive more rainfall than any other world region and have 3 of the world's 6 largest rivers in volume, parts of the region are still experiencing water crises. It's not evenly distributed. Most of these factors are induced by humans, and lax environmental policies allow industries to pollute air and water with few restraints. Some of the drivers are also rapid urbanization combined with corruption, inadequate investment. So this has left many people without access to clean water and sometimes without sanitation as well. So on the human geography note, it's important to remember how many plants and animals were exchanged between this region, Europe, Africa, and Asia during the colonial era, and still continuing through this day. Many plants were first domesticated by the indigenous people of our Middle and South America, have shaped modern diets and fueled population growth, such as corn, cassava, potatoes, originally from the Andes, tomatoes from Middle America, peppers, avocados as well, strawberries and tobacco even. So huge world crops that set in motion a very significant colonial trade regime. Some of that legacy continues with the economies in Middle America are much more complex and technologically sophisticated from what they used to be. But 30% of the population is poor and lacks access to land, adequate food, shelter, and sanitation. A small elite class does enjoy the affluence equivalent to those of the very wealthy in the US, but a lot of these conditions are lingering as a result of colonial economic policies that favored the export of raw materials and fostered undemocratic privileges for these elite. So to take a closer look at globalization and development, key term here is income disparity, referring to the gap between rich and poor. In Middle America, it's the largest in the world. There's a unique colonial and post-colonial history that's resulted in these inequalities and disparities, as well as the persistent political disempowerment of poor people, structures and policies that keep disenfranchising marginalized people. Important to note here is the structural adjustment and marketization phase of this region. Structural adjustment policies rolled out by the International Monetary Fund required reorganization towards less government involvement in industry, agriculture, and social services. They're also based on privatization, which is the selling of formerly government-owned industries and firms to to private investors. This resulted in a lot of marketization, which is a key part of neoliberalization, which we will continue to look at throughout this course. We hear a lot about in the news. Development of the free economy, quote unquote, in support of free trade, which is a bit of a misnomer and a highly contestable term. Opening the national economy to global investors, which thereby furthered the privatization and marketization. It's had a lot of impacts of these structural adjustment programs, with the state-owned firms being sold to multinational corporations, or MNCs. It required governments to fire many civil servants and drastically reduced spending on public health, education, job training, daycare, water systems, sanitations. So these have enormous impacts on the social fabric when governments in Middle and South America, but similarly around the world, they undergo these privatization and marketization schemes. There's huge impacts on social well-being. And as we point out here, it took government services away from the poor and middle-class workers. Since was a backlash against them, especially in Venezuela by President Chavez, nationalized foreign oil companies operating in Venezuela and use the oil wealth to help other countries pay off debts. In Bolivia, Evo Morales nationalized the natural gas industry. So you can think of propane or natural gas, huge reserves of it in Bolivia, and it's generated a lot of public funds to nationalize, the opposite of privatization. And more recently, the IMF has moved from the structural adjustment programs to poverty reduction strategies, an attempt to combine marketization with investment in social programs. This is having some positive results, and some people are still quite critical of the legacies of the structural adjustment programs. So to look at power and politics a bit here, some key terms that we need to keep in mind, such as dictator, such as what happened in Chile in the overthrow of a democratically elected president, the first democratically elected president, Salvador Allende, in Chile in the 1960s and 70s, left a very strong legacy of absolute authority, governing with little respect to the law or rights of citizens. We're seeing that under dictator there. And instability remains. Elected governments are sometimes challenged by protest or threatened by a coup d'etat. It's a French word literally meaning a hit on the state. Is when a military or civilian-led forceful takeover of the government, such as just recently in Brazil, in fact. Peaceful democratic elections, nevertheless, are the norm in the region. However, sometimes there still is instability. And then also to look at urbanization. Some key points we need to point out here about migration and urbanization. More than 70% of the people in the region live in settlements of at least 2,000 people. This is a significant amount of urbanization. You see the picture here of Mexico City, one of the most populated regions of the world. Increasingly, one city, or also known as a primate city, when is vastly larger than all the others, accounting for a large percentage of a country's population. So Mexico City houses more than 21% of the country's total. It's a very significant amount. Um, Concentration of people into one or two large cities in a country leads to uneven spatial development. Very strong emphasis in geography on spatial distribution, how things are occurring across space. Or you could think of the landscape as a synonym for this space concept here. And this also leads to uneven government policies and social values that favor the largest urban areas. Bolivia, in the case of La Paz, or perhaps to a smaller degree, including Sucre in the south, would also exemplify this. Chile very prominently exhibits this phenomena. And then also gender and urbanization. Rural women are just as likely as rural men to migrate to the city, especially when employment is available in foreign-owned factories. We commonly see along the Mexico side of the U.S.-Mexico border that produce goods predominantly for export. It's also the case in Argentina and Chile very commonly as well. Male urban migrants tend to depend on short-term, low-skilled day work in construction, maintenance, small-scale manufacturing, and petty commerce. And many of the people work in informal economies, such as street vendors, errand runners, car washers, and recyclers. And unfortunately, some turn to crime. You can also see how children are often left alone in the streets to scavenge for food or earn money for the family. So these are some of the social realities of rapid urbanization, income disparity, and some of the challenges that the Middle and South American countries face, as well as many areas of the world, by no means solely in Middle and South America. But when there's such a wide income disparity, unfortunately, some of these social conditions are exacerbated. So I look forward to our discussions, and please post your questions down below. Thanks.